Welcome to the Supporting Our Children During Distance Learning webinar. This webinar will focus specifically on tips and strategies for caregivers of middle and high school students. A little bit about me. My name is Sarah Underdahl. I'm a licensed independent clinical social worker, and I work as a therapist with the Scott County Mental Health Center in the Connect program. I'm located specifically in the school districts of Prior Lake and Savage, as well as Jordan schools. If you don't know about the Connect program, this is a partnership between Scott County Schools and the Scott County Mental Health Center that allows therapists to be co-located in schools within Scott County so that students can get therapy services during the school day. If you have questions after the presentation, you can reach out to me at my email, and I'm happy to respond to those questions there. This evening, we'll be talking about structure, motivation, and connection in relation to distance learning and strategies that support students in middle and high school. We're currently all experiencing many changes in the ways that we live, in the ways that we learn, in the ways that we go to work. And any time that there is a change, stress increases. And usually this stress helps us to adapt to the change. So for example, if you are suddenly assigned a presentation for the following day at work, you might feel a lot of stress about this presentation, but it's likely that that stress is going to help you adapt to the change and prepare so that you are ready for your presentation. So in that situation, stress is really a positive force that helps you to complete the task that you were assigned. However, currently, in addition to all of these changes, which are creating stress, it's more difficult to adapt because there is also a lot of uncertainty on top of these changes. It's really hard to predict what the world and requirements might look like in even the next month. And so this can create a higher level of stress and make it more difficult to cope and adapt to the stressors that we are experiencing. It's really difficult for everyone, but we especially notice this in kids and adults where planning ahead and knowing what to expect is really important. So for example, a child that is really anxious, typically knowing what to expect, planning ahead, and knowing those expectations is really important to them. And so not having this can create a lot of difficulty and stress for them, as well as other individuals. You might notice that right now your children are having a harder time regulating their emotions. You might notice more irritability or sadness, and this can be due in part to the stress that they're experiencing right now. So the first thing that we can do to help decrease this stress and help our children cope during this time is to create consistency and predictability in the home. Because we know that the opposite of change is consistency and the opposite of uncertainty is predictability. When children are in school, their days are quite planned out. They're pretty consistent. There's quite a bit of routine in them and structure. And so as much as possible, trying to bring this into their new learning environment in the home. Because if kids know what to expect, they have this consistency, this predictability, this structure, it can help to decrease some of that anxiety. So how do we do this? Number one, just understanding the expectations for distance learning for your child. Making sure that you understand when are they expected to be on more like live learning sessions? What is their schedule like? What are they expected to be doing during the times when they're not engaging directly with a teacher? When are their assignments due? Are they due at the end of each day? Is there a certain time for this? Or maybe they're due at the end of each week or even further out. So helping to get yourself familiar with these expectations for your child so that you can communicate a consistent message between school and home. Also, thinking about the environment where your child is completing their learning. Trying to reduce distractions that are available as much as possible and thinking about learning taking place in an environment that's really going to promote focus and attention. So if your child is doing their schoolwork in front of the TV or they're maybe waking up and just turning on their computer and doing their schoolwork from bed, it's likely that they'll be more distracted. They might feel less focused. They might feel more tired. And it's not going to signal to them as much that this is a separate time of their day and it's time to work. So thinking with your child and planning with your child, especially with older kids, you can really involve them in this process. But talking to them about what is going to be the best place in your home for them to complete learning. Thinking about not having like auditory or visual distractions. So if it's possible, you might have a separate area in your home where that is really the learning space, and it helps to signal to your children that now they're starting their school day, even though it's from home. If it's possible, you also might have like a desk in your child's room so that maybe they're still in their bedroom, but they're learning from a desk. And so again, their brain is kind of creating that association with that space of this space is for learning. You can ensure that that space is cleaned off. If completing work in their room or another area of the home isn't possible, then you might consider having them even at the kitchen table, but they might be wearing headphones and like facing a direction where they're not going to have a lot of distractions present there. So really problem solving with your child about what is the best place for them for learning to take place. Being really intentional about breaks during your child's day. We'll talk more in a minute about scheduling and how that might look with your child, but also being really intentional about the breaks that are in their day. When they're at school, typically kids get like passing time. And during this time, a lot of times is when they are able to socialize, they're able to engage in some movement since they're walking between classes. And so talking with your child about how you can kind of mimic this at home and create the same routine. So maybe instead of talking with their friend, they're texting them, or they're like walking around your house or engaging in kind of some other movement so that they feel focused for their next class. You also might consider having these breaks kind of depending on your child's schedule. It might be more at the beginning of the day or at lunch or after they're done learning for the day, but really trying to promote that movement because that'll help with coping, decreasing stress. It will help with sleep at night. And so thinking with them about what are the types of movement that they want to engage in. Maybe they want to go out and walk the dog. Maybe they want to try out yoga or try like practicing sports, different things like that. For some kids, having a checklist for focus can be really helpful. You might do this on a reminder app on their phone. You might do this on a Post-it note. They might have a planner. Any other kind of visual, but just sometimes writing down the actual tasks that they need to complete for the day and then being able to check them off is a really helpful tool that can help them to see the success that they have throughout the day and create some motivation for the rest of the day. Another thing you might consider is implementation intentions. So these are if-then statements that help to trigger action in us. So for example, when you're leaving the home for work, when you come home at the end of the day, you might have this implementation intention where you set your keys down on the counter or you put them in your purse so that they're ready for you for the next day. It's a routine that we do regularly, but we don't really have to think about doing because it's just that automatic and we just do it so regularly. So an example of an implementation intention that you might set with your teen is in the morning, they wake up. And as they're eating breakfast, they check their schedule for the day or they check their assignments for the day. And at this time, they create a to-do list. So in this example, breakfast is kind of the action point for creating their to-do list. Trying to break down the time that you're staying home with your child into really manageable chunks and not trying to think about this as something that is going to last forever or something that is really definite. Because we know just by past experience that these situations are changing so rapidly. And so trying to just plan out your day or your week with your child in manageable chunks. So rather than trying to plan out like months at a time, maybe you're sitting down every Sunday and you're talking about a plan for the week with your child. You're reviewing with them different goals that they might want to achieve during the week, talking about if there's any big assignments that are coming up that they're aware of, or other hobbies or things that they really want to engage in during the week. So writing this down in some way, whether that's virtually kind of creating a schedule, you might utilize calendar invites, they might set reminders, they might use a planner, you might have like a physical calendar that you all fill out as a family, whatever is going to work best for your family. But having this plan written down can help them to see this structure and help them to engage in this process. Them also being involved in part of this planning is a really important piece as well, because as kids get older, it's more difficult to kind of set those limits on them, and they are less likely to buy in if they're not the ones that are kind of part of this routine and part of creating this schedule. So really collaboratively creating this schedule with your team. You might also share your own daily schedule with your child, just because that helps to kind of model that this is a valuable skill. This is something that they're going to use in the future. And it also just helps them to know the times when you're going to be home, the times when maybe they're going to be alone or with a younger sibling. And so just really modeling in that way can be really helpful. So planning ahead is a really important piece of distance learning, again, to create that consistency, that predictability, and that structure. Also helping your child to kind of prioritize their tasks. And so helping them to think about maybe they have missing assignments and they have current work that they need to complete, and helping them to prioritize what is most important. Sometimes you might need feedback from their teacher to kind of create this list with them, but helping your child to prioritize what on their to-do list maybe really needs to get done today versus other things that can wait till tomorrow. You might also consider trying to scaffold their schedule in a way that makes sense for them. And so this looks like talking with your child about how they can best achieve during their day, especially during these days where maybe they have more kind of open time to engage in learning in whatever way works for them. For some kids, this might look like getting challenging subjects out of the way right away, and then they want to save their easier subjects for the afternoon because this just feels kind of like a reward to them. For other kids, they might prefer to do easier subjects first and then kind of work up to doing these more challenging tasks. And again, the easy versus challenging subjects are really just going to depend on your child and the things that they find challenging or the things that come more easily to them. Another way that sometimes kids want to scaffold their schedule is having, for example, they might start their day with something that comes easier to them, then they might do something that's more challenging and then switch back to something that's easier, just to kind of give themselves that break in there. So talking with your child about on those days when maybe they have kind of more free time to structure their schedule in the way that they choose, talking with them about what they would prefer, what's going to feel most kind of motivating to them. Again, blocking out distractions is really important, and this includes those kind of additional technology distractions that are available now with our children learning more through distance learning and having more access to technology during the school day because that's how they're learning. And so if you notice that your child is having a really hard time with focus, something you can try with them is called the Pomodoro method. And so this is a technique where you're arranging how you work to increase efficiency. And so with this tool, you use 25-minute work sessions, and during that time, you'll set a timer. This is something that adults can do as well, or teens or kids. But so you're setting a timer for 25 minutes. And then after that 25 minutes of focus on your studies, then you get 5 minutes as a break. And then you come back, you set another 25-minute timer, and you engage in another work session. And so once you've completed 4 work sessions, then you would treat yourself to a longer 15-minute break. You can also think about if that feels like too long for your child, or maybe it feels like too long for them to wait for a 15-minute break. You know that they're going to need one earlier. You can modify this to however is going to work best for your child. If you or your child is having a hard time with maybe visiting other websites during kind of the school day, like Facebook or Instagram or just other kinds of sites, some other things that you can consider are websites like Freedom, Keep Me Out, and Switcheroo. Those are all websites that help to minimize online browsing, and they can redirect you back to kind of the site where you should be at. So that's something that you can consider as well. And then there's also an app called Forest. And so that kind of gamifies focus in a way. If your child is like learning on their computer and then they have their phone next to them and their phone is a big distraction, this is an app where you can set it for a timer. So let's say you were doing this Pomodoro method. So maybe you wanted to match your timer to the work timer that you have going. And so maybe you're going to set a 25-minute timer on the Forest app. And then what it does is it determines, like, depending on the length of time, it'll either grow like a bush or a tree or multiple trees, just kind of depending on the length of time that you set. And so it locks down your phone so that you can't access other things at that time. And if you do, then it would stop the progress of like the growth of this bush or tree or whatever it is that it's trying to build. And so with the goal that over time, it creates this forest for you as you do more of these work sessions. So sometimes just gamifying it that way can help kids. And it's just fun to kind of see over time, like all of the time focusing that you've spent. So that can be an incentive as well. Sleep hygiene and routine continues to be really important during this time. Even though you're not leaving the home, it's still important that kids and teens are getting, they recommend 8 to 10 hours of sleep every night. So again, making this plan with your child, you might talk with them about, okay, this is when I know that you need to wake up in the morning, or this is when we've kind of planned to do that. And so now we need to work backwards, 8 to 10 hours. That needs to be the time when you fall asleep. Also talking with them about avoiding screens before bed, thinking about what are the things that are going to help relax them and prepare them for sleep. There's lots of different like kind of sleep time or relaxing like yoga practices online. There's lots of different visualization things and mindfulness. They might like take a shower and then read, or have like a glass of tea or something like that. So thinking about what are relaxing things that are going to help to prepare them for bed and helping your teen to identify those things. Also, making sure that their bedroom is quiet, dark, relaxing, and at a comfortable temperature. If electronic devices are something that really gets in the way of their sleep, they may be texting or on their computer rather than trying to fall asleep. We know that these are things that really signal to the brain that it's time to be awake. And so considering removing electronic devices from the bedroom, like computers or smartphones or iPads, if that's becoming a distraction, or even making a plan with your child where maybe it's going to still be in the room, but it's not going to be in reach from their bed if you feel like they're able to kind of avoid that temptation as long as it's not within reaching distance. So thinking about what's going to be best for your child, but really trying to avoid those electronic devices right before bed and while you're falling asleep. Making sure that you're avoiding large meals and caffeine before bed, and then getting some exercise during the day can really help decrease stress as well as promote sleep. Motivation is a really big piece of distance learning and something that I hear from a lot of families that kids are struggling with right now. So starting with thinking about kind of that structure and routine, continuing to encourage your teen to get ready for school each morning. And it might not be quite the same kind of getting ready routine, but they're waking up to an alarm, they're getting out of bed, they're changing clothes, even if it's just into comfy clothes, but they're not in their pajamas, because again, that's going to be just more difficult to focus because you're just not in that mindset when you're not in kind of your day clothes. And then eating breakfast before they're learning as well to help kind of fuel their brain for the day. So still getting ready each morning, even though they're not leaving the house, that routine might look different, but still getting ready in some way each day. For teens and tweens, providing positive feedback is still really important, even though maybe they don't react as much as a younger child would. It still really means a lot to them when they hear your feedback and they are paying attention even when it doesn't seem like it. And so if you notice that your child did something really well, or maybe just that they are really putting in a lot of effort to something that has been really challenging to them in the past, you can let them know that you notice that and compliment them and provide them that feedback. Know that it's okay to give your child and yourself a break. So if you notice that maybe your child has been trying really hard on this subject that they have had a really hard time with in the past and they are just hitting a wall, you hear them getting frustrated, it's okay to encourage them to take a break. It's also okay to give yourself a break because I know that a lot of you are probably just more kind of interactive with their school right now and really in it with them more than maybe you had been in the past. And so allowing yourself and your child that time of, it's okay, I know that we can return to this later. This is just too tricky right now, and that's okay. So just kind of giving yourself that grace. There's a lot of evidence that social modeling is also really motivating for really all humans, but kids and teens. And so what this is that research has found that the presence of others can help to set social norms for behaviors. So for example, if you're at home with your teen during the day, maybe you're working from home, you might consider trying to kind of match your schedule to theirs as much as possible so that they are seeing this modeling from you, because it helps to kind of unconsciously encourage them to engage in these behaviors that you're wanting them to do during the school day. So if you are not wanting them to check social media while they're engaging in their schoolwork, you're also not checking social media while you're engaging in work. Or if you are wanting them to like set those 25-minute like Pomodoro sessions, you might be modeling that same thing. And so it doesn't need to be something that you are really explicitly telling them, but even just them seeing someone else do what you want them to do can help to encourage them to complete these tasks. Just like thinking about when they are in school, they are constantly seeing social modeling from their peers. And so this can help to encourage that on-task behavior. So you would be doing the same thing in your home. For older kids, it can be really helpful during this time to talk about future goals, because it might feel like those goals are really distant or really far away, or what your children are doing now just have no kind of part of those goals. And so helping them to understand that it is making a difference, this work that they're putting in now, reminding them that this is temporary, that they will still be able to return to working more towards those goals and achieving them in the future. And so using those goals that your child has maybe already vocalized about what they want to do after high school or things that they want to do in high school to motivate them right now. Natural rewards and consequences can be really helpful during this time as well, because it can be really difficult to engage in power struggles, and natural rewards and consequences can help to reverse some of these power struggles. So rather than kind of putting it on you and saying, you can't play your video game until your math homework is complete, where you're setting that limit, you have kind of power and control over when that video game happens. You might encourage them by saying something like, there's 3 hours before bedtime, so if you put your effort into completing your homework, you'll have plenty of time for the video game. So using language like this, they know that that puts a little bit more of the power in their hands. If they're engaging in a lot of off-task behavior, it takes them a really long time to do their work, or they're just not completing it. Maybe they won't get to their video games, or they won't get as much time. Versus if they are able to just complete the work and kind of get through it, they might have even more time than they expected. So helping them to see that they do have control over their schedule and that they are in charge of some of this free time that they get. During this time, lots of kids and teens and adults are experiencing lots of really big emotions about all of the changes and all of the disruption that's been happening. And so one thing that you can do right now is just to acknowledge for yourself and for your child that you know that they're experiencing a lot of disruption and a lot of challenge right now. You might notice that they have increased feelings of anxiety or fear or anger or sadness. And this is really normal during this time. They might not be verbalizing this to you. You might just notice it in their behavior, or they might just seem a little bit different right now. And know that that could just be because they're having a hard time with processing their emotions or with labeling their emotions. So even if they're not verbalizing it, it doesn't mean that they're not experiencing it right now. A lot of people right now are experiencing what we call this ambiguous grief or ambiguous loss. And what this is losses that are really difficult to name, but we are experiencing nonetheless. So for example, like loss of routine, or some people might have experienced this kind of ambiguous loss over the holidays when their traditions around the holidays had to be different, or it just really felt different right now. And so lots and lots of people are really experiencing this ambiguous grief or loss right now. And so that could be part of what your child is experiencing. So if you're noticing these emotions in your child, the biggest thing that you can do is, well, first respond with kind of your own like calm behavior. You don't, especially if you're seeing more irritability or anger, we don't want to increase those reactions by responding with additional anger or irritability. So trying to really be your child's calm. You also can make a big impact by just, again, modeling, kind of thinking back to that social modeling. We're just going to model how we can manage and cope with emotions. So you might not even have explicit conversations. You might also talk specifically with them about how they're feeling, but it makes a big impact for them to see how you are managing and how you are coping with emotions. So really a big thing that you can do during this time is to make sure that you're taking care of yourself and that you're able to cope with your own feelings, because your children, even if they're not verbalizing this, they're probably noticing how you're coping during this time as well. You might have specific conversations with them about how they're feeling, or you might share your own experience if you're comfortable with that. So talking with them about, this is really difficult for me right now. I wonder what this is like for you, or it was really hard not seeing grandma and grandpa over your break. I really miss doing that. I wonder what you felt like, or I wonder what it's like not seeing your friends. So really just trying to engage with this kind of curious stance and openness. So the 3 C's are culture, calm, and consistency. Culture being the everyday small and big actions that we do that influence the culture in our home. Calm is using a soft voice and direct words. And then consistency is predictability. So these are things that adults provide to children and teens. But if we're feeling really maxed out, it can feel really hard to stay calm and consistent for other people. So we can run out of this mental energy to stay calm and consistent. So thinking about mental energy as a resource, many people right now are operating at what we call surge capacity to get through these changes and difficulties. Surge capacity is a collection of adaptive systems, mental and physical, that people draw on for short-term survival in acutely stressful situations. So typically, when we think of surge capacity, we think of things like natural disasters. Because this surge capacity is really helpful because it's a short-term survival skill, so it helps us get through this short-term event. Because even with natural disasters, even though the recovery period takes a long time, the actual event period is short. And so these short-term survival skills are really helpful to allow us to get through that. However, with pandemics, we tend to use the same kind of surge capacity, but with a pandemic, the actual event is a really long time. And so the disaster itself is really stretching out, and that can cause our surge capacity and our mental energy to need to be renewed. So thinking about how to conserve your mental energy, or how can you renew this if you're finding yourself feeling really burnt out, because that's a really natural emotion right now, is just to feel really burnt out, or just to be having a really hard time kind of keeping up with all of this. So number one, accepting that life is different right now. Trying not to think about, well, this is what this time of year should look like, or this is what it used to look like, but really trying to use radical acceptance for what things actually are right now, and accepting that, unfortunately, even though we might not like it, that life is different right now. Another strategy that you might try is expecting less from yourself. So for many people, they are their own biggest critics. And so knowing that right now you are trying to juggle probably more than you typically do, and playing lots and lots and lots of different roles. And so knowing that it's okay to release yourself from some of those kind of self-expectations and just expect less from yourself during this time, because you know that your energy is going probably so many more places than it typically does. Know that you are doing the best that you can, that there's really not a handbook for how to get through a pandemic in the right way. And so know that what you're doing right now is enough, and you're doing the best that you can. As I said earlier, lots of people are experiencing this ambiguous loss or grief. And so helping yourself to recognize if there are aspects of grief that you're experiencing. Maybe you're noticing yourself feeling really angry or more depressed, or you're engaging in some kind of bargaining types of statements. And so trying to recognize if there are things that you're grieving right now, and naming that for yourself so that you can kind of engage in more processing around those emotions. You might also experiment with something called both and thinking, because when you can't change your situation, sometimes the only thing that you can change is your perspective on it. And so you might use a statement like, this is really difficult right now. This is really awful how many people are getting sick. And I noticed that I have more time to spend with my family and that we've become closer. And then last, focusing on maintaining and strengthening really important relationships. Relationships continue to be this really big protective factor, and helps with stress reduction, and it helps us to feel more supported. And so thinking about what are the relationships that you really get support from, and then how can you continue to maintain and strengthen and have contact with these individuals. So the Washington Post had an article that talked about something called personal policies. So with personal policies, they are strategies that we use to help protect mental energy. They're used when maybe we have this decision that we have to make day in, day out, or maybe multiple times a day. And so we're using up mental energy every time that we make this decision. And so this personal policy can help us to become more productive and motivated in the long run, because we don't have to spend as much mental energy making these decisions, because we already made a policy about it. So to make a personal policy, you would first identify a priority or a value, and then create a personal or family policy around this priority or value. So an example is if maybe you decide that a personal policy for you is I don't take red-eye flights. Maybe the priority that kind of is the root of that personal policy is it's important to me that I am well rested when I get to the place that I'm traveling to. So maybe that's a personal policy for you. A more kind of applicable personal policy in these times is thinking about privacy during work calls. Maybe that's really your priority. This is a conflict that comes up a lot during your day because maybe there's lots of distractions as you're working from home and things that are stopping and interrupting these calls. And so many times a day, you're needing to make this decision of, do I end my work call? Do I address this distraction? Do I try to ignore it? What do I do about it? Are the kids okay? Do I need to go respond to them? That's a lot of mental energy to be taking up trying to make this decision while you're still trying to actively engage in work. So maybe a personal policy that you create kind of from that conflict is, unless you're injured or the house is on fire, please don't interrupt me during work calls. And you might make it easier for your children to digest by offering them the ability to like slip a note or a picture under the door, or you might allow them to text you questions, and maybe you let them know that you're still not able to respond to it until after your work call, but it might help them just to feel a little bit better that they're able to have that contact. But so this is a policy that you'll talk about with your kids and with your family, and so that everyone is on the same page, everyone knows that this is the policy, so that you don't need to spend additional mental energy making this decision anymore. Some additional personal policies that you might think of in your home are if your child's room is really messy, but you're also really wanting to prioritize schoolwork during this time, you might make it a personal policy that you don't comment on housework during school hours, no matter how messy it gets. So this doesn't mean that you're never going to comment on their room or ask them about cleaning it or doing chores, but you've decided that during school hours, school is your priority. Between kind of missing assignments and current assignments, maybe your child has 5 missing assignments, and so you might make it a personal policy that it's more important to prioritize today's assignments and focus on those. If you're having the trouble finding the time to have the deep thinking that your job requires, you might have a personal policy of waking up an hour before everyone else for uninterrupted time. If you notice that you feel really drained by the news or by social media, you might limit that news or social media intake to just before heading out for a walk, so that you have that time to kind of digest and decompress from that information that you received. If you notice that you're feeling really stressed out about making dinner, you might make it a family policy to meal plan on Sunday nights, or another personal policy with this same kind of conflict could be taking turns making dinner and kind of making a schedule around that. And finally, connection continues to be really important during this time. As you're playing more roles, as your child is maybe seeing you more in your work role, you are maybe a more active part of your child's education during the school day, while you're also still trying to do this caregiver role. And so trying to be really intentional about showing your caregiver role as these roles are intertwined. So to do this, you might think about doing something that's not school related with your child every day. And during this time, you're not talking about school. And this doesn't need to be a big activity. It can be something large or small. So something small might be, we're going to brush our teeth together, like Monday to Friday. And that's our time together. Or we might fold laundry or eat breakfast together. Or maybe once a week, we all have a movie night together. But again, just really prioritizing this relationship, because that continues to be really important to your child, is that caregiving relationship. During this time that you're spending with your child, you might have conversations and acknowledge that this time is really challenging and that it's okay to be struggling during this time. So the big picture, Even though it might not feel like it, the stress is going to pass. Eventually, things will return to more of what we see as normal. Know that we are in this together, even though we're all kind of experiencing it separately. We are in this together. And then just be patient with yourself and with each other. If you feel like you're needing more mental health support during this time, there are a few options for you and your children. So for middle school students in the Prior Lake schools, you can reach out to your child's school guidance counselor or school social worker about the Laker Strong group. So this is a group that will be happening for 6 weeks. It'll start on January 13th. And this group will cover things like self-care, self-compassion. We'll talk about kind of common mental health disorders in teens and tweens. And so if you feel like your child really just needs this kind of extra boost during this time, you can talk with your school's guidance counselor or school social worker about getting a permission slip to sign up. I talked a lot in the last presentation, so our first kind of presentation in this series, about when it's helpful to ask for mental health support. So just kind of briefly going over that again. The big thing is when you're noticing that your symptoms are getting in the way of daily routines, of relationships, if you're noticing that it's really impacting your work, or your child is noticing, or you're noticing that symptoms are really impacting your child's schooling, or if there's big safety concerns. Those kind of cue you in to know that it's maybe time to ask for more mental health support. So as I mentioned earlier, most schools in Scott County have the Connect program. And so that program, you can talk to your child's school guidance counselor or school social worker about the referral process. And they can get you connected to those services. The Scott County Mental Health Center's phone number is on there as well. And they see adults as well. And so if you're interested in therapy or mental health support for yourself, you can give them a call or for your child. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions that you have. You can email me and I'm happy to answer. Thank you so much for listening, and yeah, definitely reach out if you have any questions. Thanks. Bye.